If you stood far away from the palace, maybe from a quiet hill outside the city, it probably looked perfect. The towers rose into the sky like they were trying to speak directly to heaven. Hundreds of windows reflected golden sunlight during the day and soft candlelight during the night. The gardens stretched outward in careful patterns that looked almost too neat to be real. Everything about the palace was designed to make people stop walking and simply stare. And honestly, it worked. Travelers wrote about it. Poets exaggerated it. Foreign ambassadors pretended not to be impressed by it. But they absolutely were. The king who ordered the palace to be built wanted one thing more than anything else. He wanted people to remember him. Not just during his lifetime. Not just for a few generations. He wanted future centuries to whisper his name every time they looked at those enormous walls. So he built bigger. Then bigger again. And after that, somehow even bigger. Kings are very talented at spending money that is not technically theirs. Thousands of workers arrived from every corner of the kingdom. Stone cutters, carpenters, artists, gardeners, blacksmiths, painters, engineers. Some came willingly. Others came because saying no to royal orders was usually a bad career choice. The palace took years to build, then more years, then somehow even more years. At one point, an old worker supposedly joked that the palace would finish construction around the same time the moon fell into the ocean. Nobody laughed too loudly. Palaces were serious places. During the early mornings, long lines of workers carried stone through clouds of dust while bells echoed across the construction grounds. Horses dragged heavy wagons through muddy roads. The smell of wet wood, smoke, and fresh-cut stone filled the air. And slowly, piece by piece, the palace rose upward. Massive ballrooms appeared first. Then private royal chambers. Then grand staircases wide enough for entire crowds to climb at once. The king especially loved staircases. Royal architecture has always had a strange relationship with stairs. If rulers could have built staircases to the clouds, they probably would have. But the palace was not only built for beauty. That was the secret hidden underneath all the gold decorations and polished marble floors. Every hallway had a purpose. Every doorway controlled movement. Every window was carefully placed. The palace was beautiful, but it was also watching people. Servants could move through hidden corridors behind the walls without being seen. Guards stood near important rooms pretending to look relaxed while secretly noticing everything. And inside the palace, privacy barely existed. The royal family lived surrounded by hundreds of people almost every hour of the day. Imagine trying to have a bad morning while 30 servants are adjusting curtains around you. Not ideal. The king's bedroom alone required servants for candles, clothing, food, cleaning, security, messages, and ceremonies. Even waking up became a formal event. Meanwhile, beneath the palace, workers built narrow underground passages that twisted under the stone floors like roots beneath an ancient tree. Officially, these tunnels existed for practical reasons. Unofficially, people whispered about other reasons. Escape routes, secret meetings, hidden prisoners. Nobody could ever fully agree. And that uncertainty became part of the palace itself. Because the palace was enormous. Far too enormous for any single person to fully understand. Even people who lived there their entire lives sometimes discovered doors they had never noticed before. A servant might open the wrong hallway and suddenly find a staircase leading somewhere unfamiliar. A guard might hear voices behind a wall that appeared completely solid. One maid later claimed she once walked through a corridor that did not appear on any palace map. Though to be fair, exhausted servants in giant candlelit buildings occasionally imagine things. Especially after carrying soup through 17 hallways at midnight. Still, strange rumors continued. Some said entire rooms had been sealed shut during construction. Others believed hidden chambers existed behind the libraries. One story claimed that a royal architect disappeared shortly before the palace was completed. Naturally, this only made the rumors stronger. Nothing grows faster than mystery, especially in places where nobody is allowed to ask questions. And that was the most important thing about the palace. Silence. The workers learned quickly. You did your job. You kept your head low. And if you accidentally overheard something unusual, you forgot it immediately. At least publicly. The palace rewarded obedience. People who followed rules could rise surprisingly high. A servant could become trusted. A guard could gain influence. A noble could earn royal favor. But people who spoke too freely often disappeared from important conversations. Or from the palace entirely. Over time, the building itself began to feel less like a home and more like a carefully controlled machine. Every movement inside it followed invisible rules. The king sat at the center of everything like the sun in a tiny universe. Around him moved ministers, nobles, guards, servants, musicians, cooks, tutors, messengers, and spies. Though officially, there were definitely no spies. Official statements are wonderful little works of imagination. At night, when construction workers finally rested, the unfinished palace became strangely quiet. Wind moved through empty corridors. Candlelight flickered against bare stone walls. Distant footsteps echoed through rooms not yet furnished. And during those silent hours, the palace almost felt alive. Huge buildings sometimes create that feeling. Not because they are haunted, probably, but because thousands of human emotions become trapped inside them. Ambition, loneliness. The palace absorbed all of it. The king, meanwhile, continued expanding his dream. More rooms, more gardens, more fountains, more mirrors. Mirrors became especially popular. Nothing says royal confidence quite like building an entire room dedicated to looking at yourself from 17 different angles. But behind all the luxury was a quieter truth. The palace existed because rulers feared being forgotten. Stone walls could not stop time, but kings always hoped they might. Years passed. The palace finally neared completion. Visitors arrived from distant kingdoms and stood speechless beneath painted ceilings and glittering chandeliers. For musicians played in giant halls. Servants hurried silently through hidden passageways. Guards watched from shadows. And at the center of it all stood the palace itself. Beautiful, massive, silent. A place built to impress the world. And a place already beginning to hide secrets inside its walls. Because long before the palace became famous for its beauty, it became famous for the things nobody spoke about. And that silence would grow heavier with every passing year. By the time the palace was fully alive with nobles, servants, guards, musicians, cooks, and royal guests, it had become something far more complicated than a building. It was a world. A very expensive world. And like every world, it had rules. Thousands of them. Some rules were written down carefully in official books. Others simply floated through the palace like invisible ghosts. Everybody knew them. Nobody explained them. If you were new to palace life, you learned quickly. Or very painfully. A servant had to bow correctly. A noble had to greet people in the right order. A guard had to stand in the exact right position. Even walking through the wrong door at the wrong time could create disaster. Imagine being stressed because you held a spoon incorrectly. That was palace life. From sunrise until late into the night, people performed carefully planned routines. The palace almost worked like a giant theater. Except nobody was allowed to forget their lines. 5 in the mornings, servants moved through long corridors carrying silver trays, hot water, fresh clothing, letters, and breakfast meals. They walked quietly across polished floors while trying not to attract attention. Making noise was dangerous. Not officially, of course. But loud servants were remembered. And being remembered too much inside the palace was rarely a good thing. Young servants spent months learning how to move silently, how to pour drinks correctly, how to avoid eye contact at the wrong moment, how to pretend they had not overheard important conversations, which happened constantly. Palaces were full of doors. And unfortunately for royalty, doors are not always excellent at keeping secrets. The nobles had their own complicated system of behavior. Every dinner became a performance. Every conversation felt carefully measured. Every smile hid another thought behind it. People bowed to one another while secretly competing for influence. One wrong sentence could destroy years of political friendship. And the terrifying part was this. Most palace arguments happened politely. Nobody shouted. Nobody slammed fists onto tables. Instead, someone might say, "Oh, what an interesting opinion," which actually meant, "I will ruin you slowly over the next 6 months." Royal courts were strangely calm places on the surface. That calmness hid enormous tension underneath. The king expected perfect behavior at all times. Meals followed strict order. Ceremonies followed strict order. Even standing near the king followed strict order. Some nobles spent years trying to stand slightly closer to the throne during ceremonies. Human beings are fascinating creatures. Give them gold clothing and giant palaces, and they will still compete over standing positions. Meanwhile, the servants watched everything. They noticed which nobles suddenly stopped visiting certain rooms. They noticed who arrived late at night. They noticed which royal marriages looked cold behind closed doors. But palace servants survived by acting invisible. That was the true skill. A perfect servant was someone people stopped noticing entirely. One former palace maid later described the job like this: "You must become part of the furniture." Which sounds slightly sad, and also extremely tiring. The pressure inside the palace affected everyone differently. Some nobles became obsessed with reputation. They worried constantly about gossip. Who was talking? Who was watching? Who was losing favor? Because royal favor could disappear quickly. One week a noble might dine beside the king. The next week nobody spoke to them at all. The palace could freeze people out with terrifying politeness. And then there were the royal children. Even they followed strict rules. Young princes practiced formal greetings before they were old enough to fully understand politics. Princesses learned how to walk, sit, smile, and speak according to court expectations. Childhood inside the palace often looked beautiful from the outside. But beautiful things are not always comfortable. Many royal children grew up surrounded by luxury while barely experiencing ordinary affection. Parents often behaved more like rulers than family. A prince might see his tutors more often than his mother, which honestly explains a surprising amount of history. At night, palace dinners stretched for hours. Huge candlelit halls filled with music, conversation, silver dishes, and carefully practiced laughter. The king sat beneath glittering chandeliers while nobles competed for attention. But underneath the elegance, nearly everybody was nervous. You had to say the correct thing, wear the correct clothing, react correctly, laugh correctly. Even silence had rules. And silence became one of the most important parts of palace life. Certain topics simply vanished from conversation. Nobody openly discussed royal arguments. Nobody discussed financial problems. Nobody discussed illnesses inside the royal family. And absolutely nobody discussed scandal unless they wished to destroy themselves socially. So people learned a strange skill. They learned how to communicate without directly speaking. A glance across the room. A pause during conversation. A sentence that sounded polite but carried hidden meaning. The palace became filled with coded behavior. Visitors from outside the court often found it exhausting. One foreign diplomat supposedly wrote that palace conversation felt like walking across a frozen lake while pretending not to notice the cracks. Which was honestly a very accurate description. And despite all the luxury, many people inside the palace felt deeply lonely. Real friendships became difficult in places built on power. Could you trust someone who smiled at you during dinner? Maybe, maybe not. Could you trust a servant? Possibly. Could you trust a minister? Probably less. The palace rewarded caution. Over time, people stopped saying what they truly thought. Instead, they said what was safe. And slowly, silence spread through the palace halls. Not the peaceful kind of silence. The heavy kind. The kind built from fear, reputation, and survival. Because inside the palace, words could become dangerous. A rumor could destroy a marriage. A joke could offend a noble. A careless sentence could change someone's entire future. So people became careful. Very careful. Even laughter sometimes sounded nervous. And while the palace glittered with gold, music, and celebration, something colder quietly grew underneath it all. People began hiding parts of themselves. Servants hid what they overheard. Nobles hid their fears. Queens hid their unhappiness. Ministers hid political schemes. Everyone performed. Everyone watched. Everyone remained silent. The palace looked magnificent to visitors. But behind the polished walls and endless ceremonies, it had already become a place where truth moved carefully through shadows. And over the years, those shadows would only grow deeper.